All right, go ahead.
Okay, no problem. Jane and I tried to contact Laura by email, but unfortunately she hasn't responded. She may be busy, I don't know. But she's, as you'll see, she's originally from New Mexico, was born in Ruidoso, grew up in Albuquerque, and is very accomplished in her field, both in law and study of race relations. And so it should be, this fellow here is going to be interviewing her. So that's the video that we'll watch for about 30 minutes. And it takes place in 2018. So it's a little out of date, but it's still very relevant. So I'll just start the video.
Race in America, a candid conversation. I'm your host, Monty Poole. I am joined today by Dr. Professor, well-esteemed academic, Laura Gomez. Laura, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Monty. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, and as you can see, her book is strategically placed behind her. The book, Inventing Latinos, A New American Racism. And I'll start with this because, you know, you have a very strong background in law, sociology, so you've kind of been around a little bit and you've studied these things. What do you make of the fact that at this current time, there's a push for a new Supreme Court justice? And we're following this story now, and obviously, we know we lose Ruth Bader Ginsburg a short time ago, and the Republican Party is pushing to replace her, and they already have a candidate in line. And I'm thinking, in your situation, as you look at this thing unfold, what's your feeling about it?
Well, I number one, it was a tragic loss to lose somebody of the stature of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who really she was kind of like what Thurgood Marshall was to the civil rights movement. She was to women's liberation, right? And it's actually very interesting to compare those two movements. But it's a huge loss. There is no question that Judge Barrett, if she's confirmed to the Supreme Court, is going to vote on the conservative side, the very, very conservative side, and that will affect people of color. And I think people in the country, regardless of race, who are a little bit more disenfranchised, economically, it's going to affect them in ways big and small. But I'll have to tell you, one thing that's interesting about that is because the Supreme Court has already eviscerated so many of the civil rights victories, it's not going to necessarily be this, immediate night and day. For example, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that's already been, there's not much more you can do to take out the teeth of that, the enforcement provisions of that.
Yeah, and you look back at this situation and you compare it to 4 years ago when President Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland, and Mitch McConnell basically shot that down and said it's not happening, even though there was 8 months before the election. And now you're looking at a situation where you're talking about 6 weeks before the election, and the opinion, the stance of the entire party has changed from, we can't do it in an election year to we must do it in an election year, even though there are just a few weeks to go. So you talk about where it might head if this takes place, but what do you think about the possibility of expanding the Supreme Court? Is that a solution, or is that just grasping at straws?
Well, I don't think it's grasping at straws. I think that if Judge Barrett is confirmed, then, and if the Democrats take the Senate and the presidency, then every option should be on the table, because the rights that the Supreme Court has power over are too important. And so it might be that it's not written in the Constitution how many justices there are on the Supreme Court. And I think it's been about 100 25 years or something that we've had this 9 justices on the Supreme Court, but there's nothing that says it can't be 13 or 15, you know? And as we think about the nation and the diversity of the nation, you know, maybe it is time to think about a bigger court that allows us to have justices that look more like the people that they serve.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about the changing demographics of the country. And, you know, right now, roughly 1 in 6 Americans is Latinx. And that number is only going higher. You know, at some point it's going to be 1 in 5.
Yeah, I think it's actually closer to 1 in 5, guys. I think it's just about 20% right now.
Yeah.
And it's going to be 30% within a couple decades.
So when you see that happening and you look at what we're dealing with right now, where there's so much emphasis on Black Lives Matter in the wake of the George Floyd incident, and we've seen so many situations where African Americans have been killed by police officers in the line of duty of their jobs, they say, but at the same time, so many of these incidents where the actual victim, the person who dies, is unarmed and not even threatening. Where
Can your chef's knife do this?
Oh,
This handcrafted Japanese knife is not a toy. This $50 traditionally made Japanese knife is taking the world by
If you click
storm.
skip ads.
It slices through anything in
where does the Latinx community fit into this? Because, you know, it's a fight that we're all trying to be involved in, but we've talked to people recently and they've said, you know what, there are situations where it's the same and there's sometimes it's different too. Where do you stand on that?
Oh, that's a really good, important question. First of all, let me say that, you know, it's just been very critical that the nation has actually, over the course of these past 4 months, begun a more serious reckoning with anti-Black racism and with police violence, and even talking about reparations, right, for slavery. The fact that that's now a serious conversation is just, you know, wonderful. It's tragic that it had to be because of particularly George Floyd being murdered by the police, but even all these others, right, that it's been accumulation. But it's great that we're having that conversation, and it's great to see so many people of so many different races out there in the protests, right? Mostly young people, of course, but of all different races. Now, that said, I do think that there is a little bit of tension exactly for what you've laid out, because there's some Latinos and some Latino organizations who are kind of saying, well, like, what about us? Like, we want to be, you know, we are actually violated by the police also, and we want to be in there. And I think there's a way to say that, but it's not that way. You know, it's not like let's take the spotlight off of African Americans right now. It's more like, you know, we support, what I would say it should be is, we support Black Lives Matter, absolutely. And, you know, without displacing that focus, let's also educate people about where Latinos fit. And oftentimes it is actually very similar. So if you think about a place like New York City and you think about stop and frisk policy, stop and frisk was, you know, it was the policy that Mayor Bloomberg initiated when he was mayor, but actually no, Rudy Giuliani initiated it, right, in the late 1990s, and then Bloomberg kind of inherited it and ran with it. But if you look at the data on that, actually Latinos were more likely to be to experience police brutality than African Americans. So that was an interesting, but you know, it's like apples. It was so much, and it's so extreme, and it was very clearly a way to harass Latino and African American men, young men especially, either in their neighborhoods where there was kind of saturation of police, or in neighborhoods where they didn't belong, right, in more affluent neighborhoods. But then you go to other places and it's a little bit different, right? Los Angeles there's been, I think, 7 people that the LA County sheriffs have killed just since George Floyd was killed. And I think it's about half and half Latino and African American. So it varies from place to place. I know I'm going on at length, but I want to say a couple of more quick things before we leave this question. One is that even though I'm talking in terms of African Americans and Latinos, let's not forget that there are Black Latinos, or there are Latinos who are Black, right? So, or Blacks who are Latino. That's a significant population. It's one that we often overlook. And so, in fact, some of our data is not as accurate as it would be because we don't necessarily track that well in the census and in other government record keeping.
Yeah, it is. One more thing that you're right, it's difficult to track because there's a certain amount of, I guess you can say, of influx there between both sides. And so it's often hard to keep up with who is who and what category they should fall under. So it is an issue. Now, you were the first person of color to serve as president of the Law and Society Association, and which, from what I understand, deals with law in the context of race, culture, politics, and economics. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about that and why that attracted you and what you would like to, what you wanted to accomplish with that.
Yeah, well, the organization seeks to basically, and law professors are part of this organization, but many other folks who come from other disciplines and who are really just trying to understand law in a much broader context. Because sometimes lawyers, they kind of have blinders on, and, the traditional lawyers anyway, and they're going to say, we don't need to look at this or that, politics or culture or, sports or leisure. We don't need to look at that stuff. But, the school of thought that I come from is, no, it actually is all kind of intertwined, right? You've got all these intersecting vectors, and that's how we want to understand law. And it's a really interesting time to be having conversations about critical race theory. That's what I'm actually teaching this semester. And I was just actually listening to a podcast that Megyn Kelly did last week after the debate, and she and her guests were just, Hugh Hewitt, I think was his name, and he was just bashing critical race theory. Actually, I want to show you something to just tell you what something that he said. He called it a deeply destructive paradigm for understanding the law. And I'm like, what? Like, what does he mean? And, how is it that this theory, which is very, very much in the ivory tower, right? We'd like it to not be, but it is.
Right.
How is it so threatening to certain white people, And I think the idea that this is not a perfect nation, right? That we don't always, and we don't usually live up to our goals of equality, I think that's very threatening to some people.
Get this extremely high-tech $3,000 drone for a fraction of the price. This drone engineer built a revolutionary drone at an incredibly low price, and he just destroyed.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be that way. Now, you have expressed some theories about the way that Black people and also Latinx people deal with white supremacy. And right now we're living in a time where, we have a president who is afraid to criticize the entire concept of white supremacy, which sort of leads us to believe that he is a believer. When you hear the term white supremacy, what does it mean to you as a Latinx woman?
So I approach it from a very kind of bird's eye view, big picture. White supremacy is the idea that people of color should be kept in their racial place, and that the white power structure, whether it's in economics, Fortune 500 companies, or whether it's in in terms of political power, that is, that is the value, right? Now, it's very interesting because I'm teaching in my class today. In a couple hours, I'm teaching an article that was written in 1990 about the difference between the moderate civil rights movement, Black civil rights movement of the mid 20th century, and the more radical Black nationalist movement. And of course, we know which of those won out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those dynamics in terms of where white supremacists stand, right, and where they might be hiding, I think is really interesting, right? Because I think today that many whites say, oh, I'm a liberal, I'm in favor of civil rights, right? I'm in favor of Black Lives Matter. And white supremacists are saying, oh no, I'm not in favor of that. But I think that there's some overlap between those groups, right? Where there's kind of, when it gets to the nitty gritty of, do you want a Latino family living next door to you, right? Do you want, a Black family living next door to you? And of course, given the demographics that we were talking about, it's more likely to be a Latino a family, right?
Yes.
Today.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, and we have Proposition 16 on the ballot in California here, which seeks to overturn the ban on affirmative action. And, there's been a number of these propositions that have gotten a lot of conversation, a lot of debate. On Prop 16, though, where do you stand on, yes, no, and also just why do you think it's even brought up again?
Yeah, it's I am very much in favor of Prop 16, and let me tell you a story. When I first started teaching here at UCLA, I was 28. It's 1994, and so it was pre-Prop 209. And I was teaching first year students, and I was teaching the subject of criminal law. And it just so happened that I started teaching the year that our first year students, our incoming students, looked more like the California than they had ever looked. There was a majority of people of color and a minority of white students in that year. And it was incredible. We had the best conversations, and just the fact that I had a substantial number of African American students and a substantial number of Latino students, and they could disagree with each other, right? They didn't have to represent the Black view or the Latinx view. It was just such a wonderful experience. And then a year later, Ward Connerly, who was on the UC Board of Regents at the time, he pushed forward kind of the precursor to Prop 209. And then Prop 209 was passed in 1996, and our student body just dramatically changed, right? To the point where I would teach criminal law to 80 students in those years and not have a single African American student. And that's just wrong. That's just wrong. So the number of Latino and African American students just plummeted. And we're doing better now, but we're not doing where we need to be. We're not hitting those marks. And the other thing is we're not able to hire faculty. So, right now on a faculty of 60, there's 2 Latinx faculty members.
Let me make sure I heard you correctly. Faculty members.
Yeah.
Department 60.
Yeah.
Two Latinx.
Yeah, two Latinx born in the U.S. Mexican Americans. I would include others. There also is an Argentinian who came here to the U.S. As a graduate student, right? But
Yes.
has a very different experience. But that's kind of shocking, right?
Well,
It
that
should
doesn't
be
exactly
shocking.
fit with the demographics of the state, first of all, by any measure. And it also points up sometimes, again, the difficulty in trying to get into positions of authority where your voice is heard. And as long as you have such a minority of people that are in those positions, then the voice is going to be muted. You know, it won't be as loud as you want it to be.
It's like coaching, right? You know, I'm the person who's standing up there at these days it's sitting in front of a camera, but standing up there in front of the classroom, who has authority, right? Who has that power in you know, in terms of leading thought, and who can people see as a role model, right? And you know, so I'm really, you know, hopeful that Prop 16 will pass. Now, I think that the sad part about it, right, is, you know, if a case does come up to the Supreme Court and we have a Justice Barrett, well, then probably we're going to have that foreclosed at the national level, right? But there's not a case pending right now, so, you know, it will take some time for that to happen, and that's another reason that we kind of get back to the court. The court expansion option is really, I think, has to be on the table.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of the questions I want to ask you about, and they're related before we get to your book here. The first one is that you have some theories on the way the health policies in this country are instituted and the effect they have on different communities. And I'm curious to know, I mean, people always, whenever I see a study that says, well, a poll has showed that, for example, that Latino people or Black people are, you know, 20% more likely to die of a disease that most white people won't die from. What does that tell us about our health policy, and is that something that's even fixable in the near future?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's you know, it's interesting. I was talking to my mom this morning, and she has a cousin who just died of COVID. And he was blind, and he had diabetes, and, you know, so he had pre-existing, you know, conditions, and we have a lot of diabetes in my family. You know, but she and my mom is a retired registered nurse, and we were talking about who gets to go to the hospital when they feel sick. Even if you go to the ER, you know, certain doctors, they're going to send certain people home, right? Because they don't believe that they're in as much pain as they are, or because they don't think that they have the means, or because they can't even communicate with them, right? If English is not their first language. And who are they gonna, you know, put in the hospital and give really good care? I always joke, when I go to the doctor, I always say I'm a law professor, you know, and I get pretty good treatment. But you know, I have to kind of say that because I'm worried that I will just fall into a stereotype, you know. But other people don't have that access, and so at the level of society, we're not, you know, where we see such healthcare inequalities. We need to do something about that, and that requires taking racism seriously at all levels. For example, if you live in a low-income neighborhood, you're going to have less access to a full-service grocery store.
If you're suffering from cataracts, diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, glaucoma, blurred vision, or any other vision
that sells fruits and vegetables, right? And you're going to have more access to junk food. And the junk food, the fast food, is going to be the cheapest food out there, right? So, you know, there's something wrong with that when we have those kinds of, you know, structural or systemic conditions, and we're not willing to do anything because we say, oh, well, that's just the free market. That's how it works.
Yeah, and you know, unfortunately, you know, we've heard these over the years. You hear these stories about how, you know, there's, they call them food deserts, because basically there is one supermarket in a large area maybe where you can get fresh produce, fresh meats, and so forth. And so people end up eating a lot of processed food, whether it be buying from the store or buying it at a fast food restaurant. And also at the same time, there's also a situation where people are not allowed. Well, there's those same areas have higher smog, higher rates of asthma, because they're near, you know, trains and transportation depots and so forth. So there's a lot of issues there. When you hear the term socialized medicine, which some people want to demonize and say, oh, it's terrible, it's awful. What do you hear when you hear that term?
Well, I mean, I think that I think about Britain or Canada, I have some friends who moved here about 5 years ago from Canada, and they're constantly appalled at what they're required to go through, even to use their insurance, right? And, it just doesn't have to be this way, right? We could have a society where we could take care of everyone with preventive health care, and then we wouldn't be paying at the back end, right? If we invest at the front end, we wouldn't be paying at the back end.
Two questions now. One, first of all, I know you have some theories on the drug war, the war on drugs, and what it has done to us as society. Obviously it was designed to get rid of drugs, which, let's face it, that's not realistic. It's never happened. It's not going to happen. You couldn't get rid of alcohol and prohibition, so it's not going to happen. But what in your mind, what has it done to general society into specific communities?
I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because if you go back to the LA Times in the 1930s and 1940s, they're talking about the fear of marijuana and the Mexican, and, right? Like this idea that a particular drug is associated with a particular group of color, and in particular with men of color. It's very much part of the whole notion of the criminal predator. And we are hearing it 4 years ago when Trump announced his candidacy, or I guess 4.5. He says, oh, Mexicans are coming here, and Mexican rapists, and, all of this, right? He talks about the gangs, and, so this demonization of human beings for their drug use, that's always been how it's been treated in terms of African Americans and Latinos. But now if you look at how we've been talking about these last 4 years, especially about the opioid crisis, and we've been saying, oh my gosh, we have to do something about this problem, right? It's been a totally different thing. So we've been medicalizing that problem, right? Prescription, opioid abuse. Well, these are victims. We need to get them drug treatment. But for people of color, it's not seen as a medical problem. It's seen as a crime problem. And when you look at the over-incarceration, no country in the world imprisons as many human beings as the United States does. And at the state and federal level, that has been overwhelmingly because of drug convictions. And it's just a shame. And I think that, any person of color, and certainly I'm in this situation, we have family members who have been locked up because they had a drug problem, rather than having that socialized medicine, where we could say, what, get some help. And we could say early on, get some help. And there's a good program and it's free, right?
It's
We
one of
didn't
those
have
things
that
where
option.
you look at it now, and obviously, like I said, it's a failed war because it's an unwinnable war. But you're right. I mean, the hypocrisy, I guess it should be not surprising, because there was so much hypocrisy in the way that we've done things for so long. So now about the book, Inventing Latinos, A New Story of American Racism. What took you to a place where you thought, I need to write this book, and talk to us a little bit about what you hope to accomplish with the book?
Yeah, well, the title, I'm using this word inventing in a kind of a playful sense, right? Because usually when we think about inventing something, we think about, inventing the internet or inventing the printing press or something. But in fact, when we think about racial categories, those are invented as well, right? So, this notion that racial categories are socially constructed and reflect a particular, historical and political context. And what I'm writing about in this book is how, beginning in 1980, the census first started counting Latinos. And so, now, 40 years later, we understand people, we understand a population as Latino, even though before 1980, we never talked about such things. And I'm really hoping that the book reaches, in particular, I think, two audiences. One is people like yourself who are thought leaders working in the media, in particular, working in the publishing industry. I think in particular, you know, we're both in California, but in particular, people on the East Coast, they don't really understand who Latinos are, and you know, they don't get it. They think, okay, some new immigrants. They don't really understand the dynamics. And so that's one audience. And the other audience is for Latinos themselves, because I've written several books, and over the past, you know, 25 years that I've been in teaching and in scholarship, Latinos, especially young Latinos, but of all ages, they're so hungry for their own history, you know, and we just don't hear that. And people say, you know, and my students say this, people that I meet, they just say, God, I didn't know any of this history. You know, like I didn't know that that we had this history, that we had these stories. And so I'm really hoping that, you know, it's a resource in that regard.
Awesome. Now, this has been pretty heavy topic conversation here, but we'll end it with light. You live in Southern California. The Los Angeles Dodgers are in the playoffs. Are you rooting, or are you just sitting back watching and saying whatever happens, happens?
You know, I wish I could go to a game. In fact, my son and I had some hot dogs the other day, and I said, this tastes like a Dodger dog. And he said, overrated. Now I'm like, no, what I would do for a Dodger dog, and to be in Dodger Stadium with a beer and a hot dog and watching a game. But that is not where we are in 2020. So I wish the Dodgers luck. I wish the Lakers luck. And hopefully someday I can go back and get a hot dog.
I think we all hope that day comes sometime soon, and maybe next year. Let's hope. Again, that is Dr. Laura E. Gomez, author, professor at UCLA. And Dr. Gomez, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Monty. I really enjoyed it.
This has been Race in America, a Candid Conversation.
Hey everyone, Grant Liffman alongside Drew Schiller, and we have a special guest with us today, and that is Kevin O'Connor. He is an NBA analyst with The Ringer, and if you haven't done it yet, check out his NBA draft guide for the 2020 NBA draft coming up. There's a lot of interesting nuggets in there that you're going to have to read. But first, we must ask you, Kevin, give us the amount of time that beard has taken to get to that substance.
I've been letting it go since December, so I was ahead of the curve with people letting their quarantine beards go out. I'm happy with how it's going. I'm gonna keep going and going. We'll see what happens.
You're ahead of the curve, but we're trying to flatten the curve.
That's true.
Yes,
So,
that's true.
so eventually you'll want to trim it to flatten
Trim.
it.
Yeah.
Exactly. 100%. Thank you guys for having me on to discuss my beard.
Yeah.
I don't see the
And
Playboy
that will
channel
be the end of our
anywhere.
interview. Thank you so much for joining us. So much to get to. We're going to talk the Warriors' current roster. We're going to break that down. We're going to talk about the NBA.
Okay, there we go. Sorry. Anyway, I thought that was good. So, any comments or questions? Issues? Anyone want to comment?
Well, I guess this is Dave Rice. I guess I had hoped that we would maybe get a little bit more into the book actually than we did.
Yeah, I agree.
And I obviously there were some issues that were brought up, like Prop 16, and I guess that vote has occurred now. Does anybody know what the outcome was?
I think it was implemented, I believe.
Okay, so California is allowed to do affirmative action at this point, as I understand the outcome of that. Okay, just trying to confirm what, because it was, you said, I believe that was done in 2018 from what they said, or maybe 19.
Yeah.
Dave's got his hand up.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Dave.
First of all, it's a delight to see Elisa Sanchez in person and not just her name. I hate to put her on the spot, but this is, Elisa has been trying to educate us for years and years and years about the experience of Mexican Americans and Latinas, Chicanas. And I'd really like to invite Elisa to share her perspective on the positions that Dr. Gomez is taking in her work. So if
Hi, Dave. Well, actually, I'm a little disappointed because I thought we were going to talk more about the book. Right. And we ended up talking about a lot of other things, but they're important. I think one of the things she said is that wasn't real clear, but the thing is, if we go back to the book, The Sum of Us, is that we have learned how to be each other's enemies as opposed to working together. And she sort of talked a little bit about that, but didn't get into any detail. I think so in that sense, her books are really good. She has a book called The Manifest Destinies, The Making of the Mexican American Race. And if you haven't read that, that is a really good book, because she does go, see, I'll use the word Latino, for example, because a lot of people are more comfortable with that. I call myself Mexican, you know that. And part of that is, it's like we've been taught to hate ourselves. Yep. Maybe in a very subtle way, but that's the thing. The school systems today are assimilating schools. That's what they're systems to assimilate us, to take away our language and our culture. Now, there are some rebels around there, of which I am one. I refuse to give up my language and I refuse to give up my culture. But a lot of people don't know how to fight, or they didn't have activist parents. But so anyway, I'm disappointed that she didn't get into so more detail about what it means to be who I am. But one of the things that really struck me also is that she talked about healthcare, and I think she was right, except, the thing is that with our healthcare system, somebody is making a profit off our healthcare. Insurance companies are owned by stockholders. And so what you need to do is you need to make more money for the stockholder, more money for the CEO that is making already $1 million or whatever. They're making money off our back. And then people again, don't have information, don't know. So they think, oh, well, it's a socialist system. Who wants a socialist system? Well, we have a lot. But, Medicare is a socialist system. And so, we have, the fire department is a socialist system. So what are we? It's like, it's really sad that the educational system, I don't know. Anyway, that was my comment. I'm disappointed that she didn't get into more.
Well, we're going to try to get, Jane and I are going to try to get her live here in the future. This is we didn't get a response, so we'll try to do that.
But we're not going to give up. We're going to keep working on it and start calling as opposed to emailing. But we thought this would be an introduction, since we couldn't get her right away, to her. And, one of the things that struck me as important. Like Lisa said, she didn't really develop any idea highly because she was responding to these interview questions. But she talked about the importance of teaching the history of the culture of the people and making sure that we have that history in the schools. And that is a fight to the bitter end. Because our the publications that are used in the public schools are so carefully screened to present one particular story. And that is pretty much the story of the Europeans who came here, settled, and turned this into a thriving country. So the people who are natives to this land, that is the indigenous Native American tribes, the Mexicans, here in southern New Mexico, this was part of Mexico. All of that history, which is so rich and is so much a part of their culture, is completely left out. So there's just a huge amount of advocacy to do, because until you know people's story, you don't have compassion and empathy, in my opinion. And that is what we're sorely needing in order to begin the healing in our nation.
I think it's left out of Unitarian Universalism also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Rosa, did you have a comment you want to make, Rosa Morales?
Yes, let me start my video. I want people to see my face. Okay, good. I want to add a couple of things because I guess knowledge is very important. And I want to tell you that I have an interesting experience while I was in Tucson. I attended multiple trainings by the ASU Center for the Study of Race and Democracy in Phoenix. So I went and actually hear a lot of presenters, mostly were African Americans. And I was surprised when one time I asked them, okay, I'm so glad you're providing the information about, African Americans that have been killed by law enforcement. But I want to ask you something. Do you know what is the county where more Latinos are actually dying by law enforcement? And the person, didn't know. And I said, it's Maricopa County, here, Phoenix. At that time, there was Sheriff Arpaio, in his legacy of 24 years that created the system. But as a Latina, mother of a man, I always tell people, when you're moving around, and I have moved around, live in multiple cities, those are the statistics that are very important. If you're a Latina mother and you go and live in Phoenix, be aware that this is the city where more Latinos, males, have been killed by law enforcement. Yep. So I was surprised that while there was a lot of data provided about African Americans, very limited data in Hispanics, which, it has been a surprise to me because Hispanics happen to be the largest minority in the United States. I'm going to give you a couple of statistics that I think are very important. Yeah, unfortunately, like the speaker was talking, there's very limited role modeling going on from K to 12. And also even at the college level. In fact, when I worked for Pima Community College, I was the first minority department chair out of 24. Out of 24 department chairs at the West Campus, which is the largest campus, they have never discussed about getting a minority until somebody brought it to my attention, and I went to my department and I said, I want to be department chair. Never wanted to be department chair because I wanted to focus my time on students. But knowing that fact, I said, I need to be one. And I became the department chair, the first minority. Just to let you know, I even went to my colleague, who actually is a Caucasian woman. They grew up actually in poverty and married to an African American. And I said, Tommy Mueller, do you know if there's any minorities out of the 24 department chair? She was a department chair, and she looked it over and she said, I don't know, let me look it over. She looked it over and she said, Rosa, you're right. Out of 24 of us, there's no minority. I said, okay, Tommy, now you know the next election they were having in the department, I'm running for department chair. This, when I understood that people don't even notice, not that they are racist or anything like that, it's just they get comfortable on the system. The other thing that I want to tell you is that, yes, it's very difficult for people to find role models. I went to UCLA 1987, 99, and believe me when I'm telling you, there were very limited Latinos attending at that time. But my colleague, a social worker in Tucson, she graduated 10 years earlier than me. So I couldn't even believe the things that she went through because, you know, it was 10 years before. But I want to let you know there's 2 universities in the United States that have a high number of Latinos. And there's UTEP, which I graduated from there a couple of times. And then also UTSA. For that reason, as a mother of a Latino, I decided to move my family from Los Angeles to San Antonio so my son could graduate from UTSA. And why? Because once again, I have moved my family to meet those, those aspects that I believe will be instrumental for them in their growing up. At the same time that I moved my son to San Antonio so he could go to a predominantly Hispanic university, you need to be aware that I moved from El Paso to Tucson and put my daughter in a school that was predominantly Caucasian, Saguaro High School, for her to learn how to be on the minority. Because she had gone to elementary school and middle school, you know, where she was a minority. Nobody that doesn't know how it feels to be a minority can really benefit from the experiences. It's not only about, you know, college and school and anything, it's about experiencing. That's the most powerful force. So she was surprised and she complained several times to me while she was going to school at Saguaro High School, where there were only like 10 Latinas. She was the only Latina in the cross country, actually team. She will come to my house and she said, I hate being here, Mom, because the teachers start talking about illegals and nobody says anything. There's a couple of people that are from Mexico and they are so afraid and I have to speak out. She's a very quiet person. She's not shy. You put her on the spot and she's gonna give it to you, no question about it. But she prefers not to. And she said, because of that, I have to speak out, Mom. And I said, Paloma, there's a reason why I brought you here. I want the little Paloma to come out and smell the flowers and know what's going on there, because that's what is gonna give you the foundation to survive in this country. The way you went to school in El Paso, Isleta Middle School, where there were only 2 Caucasian, 1 African-American, Capistrano Elementary School. I was a PTA president there, where they were very limited, Caucasians or African-Americans. That's not reality. I wanted my children to be able to understand and navigate their role, their lives under those conditions. It's very important for their mental health. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. I often, when I moved here to Doña Ana County, I check on the statistics every single time. And I'm looking at them right now, that 68.8% Hispanics in Doña Ana County. But I don't see them represented in city council. I just look at this week on the boards, because I got the list of the boards. Where are they? I don't see them anywhere. That's a problem. Because entities, we all need to be checking to see who's missing on the table. Even when we are on the majority, and that's the problem, I'm telling you. My dear friend, Tommy Miller, I don't think she was racist. I don't think she's racist even now. It's just that it's something that people get comfortable and they don't want to talk about it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, let's, anybody else want to comment? Go ahead. I want to use experience I have, when I came here in 2000, let's see, 2008, and I started teaching, even in this short period of time, up until last year, I didn't teach this past year. The number of Mexican Americans in my class was probably, 20%, 25%. And, but recently, up at around 2018, 2019, that had increased to about 60%. This is economic class now. That was quite a change. That's quite a change. And so I would argue that all of a sudden, Mexican Americans are saying to themselves, hey, we need education too. And so, and this is in economics now. It's not like easy class or anything. And so they were interested in learning how to be part of our capitalistic system. Anyway, that's my experience. Anybody else? Yeah, Jane, you were going to say something.
Well, I just wanted to respond to Rosa. She said many, many things that I thought were really important, which I always hear her lifting up very important ideas. You did mention the makeup of the city council. There are 7 councilors. I mean, there are 6 councilors and the mayor, I should say. And out of those 6 councilors, we have, in terms of Latinos, and Latinos, we have Gabe Vasquez, we have Yvonne Flores, we have Johanna Bencamo, and I believe that Tessa Stuvey is also, is that correct, Jen? So 2/3 of them, that is one of the places where 2/3 of the 6 counselors do represent the Hispanic, Mexican American, Latino composition of the county-wide, actually, although the city council doesn't represent the whole county. Our composition is a little bit lower in the city than the county, but that was a very hard, deliberate work of progressive citizen activists to begin to get that representation on the council. And it has happened really in the last, well, within the time that I've been here 21 years, and you were lucky to see one Latino or Latina represented on the council at that time. Jax?
Yeah, it's happened almost since I've been here. And we came in 2008. That's happened very quickly. Yes, Jack.
I believe Gil Sorg is the only Anglo on the council. Jane did not mention Cordera.
Right.
Gil Sorg is
you're
the
right.
only
You're right.
Anglo on the council.
Oh, you're correct. Yeah.
That is going to be changing in this next election, however. So it's it's moving backwards, but it still will be a majority representation of a majority population. So it's just going to be a little less of a majority on council.
So,
sorry to lose Gabe.
Just a question. We talked about the Mexican American or Hispanic population of Doña Ana County. What about other counties? I mean, like the counties to our southeast, are those equally as strongly Hispanic or Mexican American or not? Does anybody know?
I don't know. Jane, do you know?
Southeast tends to be more Anglo in population, but if you go to the west, southwest, my suspicion is that Luna County and the county that Lordsburg is in, and I'm blanking on that right now, those would have, Hidalgo. Those would have higher Hispanic populations than Doña Ana. I'm pretty sure they do. It's up around 80% at Hidalgo. Yeah.
I think then you have to also acknowledge from, let's say, Santa Fe and going up to northern New Mexico, you've got all those counties up there. Very high representation of the Latino culture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the indigenous.
Yes.
Indigenous too.
Very
Yeah.
much.
Mhm. So, you know, the history is that in order for New Mexico to become a state, we didn't become a state till 1912 because people in Congress kept arguing that the population was so Mexican and so Hispanic, and so they recruited the cattlemen from the eastern part of the country down in Florida, whom they called crackers because they cracked the whips, make the cattle move. I always had a different idea about what a cracker was where I grew up. But anyway, and so, you know, those people came over to the eastern part of the state where it is a better place to grow cattle in order to get the population up so that Congress would finally approve New Mexico becoming a state.
Yeah, it was a real battle. It was primarily because it was Mexican-American culture. Yeah, that's right. Good, Jack,
But
you
you
had
want to recognize that the Catholic Church was against statehood. They fought tooth and nail to keep it status quo because they ran the schools. They were very poor territorial schools, and the Catholic Church knew that if it became a state, the school system would improve and they would lose their population of students.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that all played in, but they didn't give up the schools until about 1950. They continued to control the schools until the year of 1950.
Yeah. Nephew, oh, wait, Lisa, you had something.
Yeah, with regard to that issue of statehood, one of the things that I had wanted to do when I was there was to bring, he's a government professor. The 60-year history, the 60-year journey to statehood for New Mexico is very, very interesting. I mean, the way they talked about us, and you know, so the thing too is that there were a lot during that time. There were some lynchings of Latinos, you know. So but again, we're invisible. We're invisible in the school curriculum. We're invisible in the history. We're invisible everywhere. So people don't know the history. We don't even know the history. So then, you know, you have some people of you Latinos that think, oh no, well, everything has been fine. You know, I personally didn't feel any discrimination. And so, you know, I mean, there's a lot of those people. And it was during the journey to statehood also that the people up north who like to be Spanish became Spanish, because that's when they said, okay, well, maybe if they're Spanish, they're European, so they'll be more acceptable. So up to that point, everybody here were vecinos, mexicas, mexicanos, you know, until people had to say, well, if we want to be in the state, in the country, we need to become Spanish. Well, if you asked all those Spanish people, what do you eat? They eat tamales, tacos, enchiladas. All of that is Mexican. It's not. And can I tell you just a funny story? You know, Spanish Kitchen over here on on US 70, right? There were some soldiers that used to like to come and eat their food. And so then a couple of guys were then sent to Spain. When they got to Spain, they looked at they went to a restaurant and they looked at the menu and they didn't see anything that looked familiar for Spanish food, right? So they said, well, you know, how come you don't have enchiladas on here? And they said, well, you know, what are enchiladas? You know, we don't know what that is. And well, yeah, it's Spanish food. I had it, you know, in New Mexico. So they said, well, tell us how you fix it. And they said, well, you have 3 tortillas and you put cheese and onion on one tortilla, and then you put a red sauce over it, and then you put another one. Well, a tortilla in Spain is an omelet. It's an omelet that's this thick. So they went back and did 3 omelets. They put some red sauce, and they did when they brought them a stack like this big. So, you know, it's. So anyway, you know, it's like that's one of our problems here in New Mexico is that it's hard to become united when, well, I don't want to be Mexican because, that's dirty. And I can remember somebody at the church when I said that I was Mexican came up to me later and said, I've never used that word because I always thought it was a nasty word. Here's nasty. Here's that nasty lady.
Annette, you had something you wanted to say. Go ahead.
Yes, since I chose this place to live for the last 45 years and being in the tax business, I have noticed that the government kind of decides on tax perks every once in a while to businesses. And so groups of people that have chosen to be invisible because that's had over history giving them security, then when there's a perk available, then they're going like, well, maybe now it's safe to come out of hiding, if there's money attached. So I had noticed when there was money available to women-owned businesses, then businesses got transferred to the women in the, family-owned businesses, and all of a sudden it was the women-owned business. And the same thing then happened if there was a Hispanic branch of the family, all of a sudden people started hyphenating their last names and businesses got transferred to that branch of the family and money became available, so I'm going like, well, there is probably a lot more people still in hiding because of the American history of whenever something bad happens, there is a list of, who can we pounce on and make them the scapegoats. And that, that's a bad thing. I mean, from our the German history, we know how easy that is to do. It doesn't take a very long time. You can round people up when you know who they are.
Well, it's towards the end of our hour here.
Paul.
Go ahead, David.
I'm sorry. I want to make a commercial announcement.
Please, go ahead.
Okay, I want to encourage everybody to read President Hitchka's column in The Light that came out today, because the safer opening task force recommendations that were adopted by the Board of Trustees for re-engaging in person are printed in her column. I was hoping that they would announce that at church services this morning, but it wasn't. So get the word out, let people know that they're there, and that those policies are church policy for now, and everyone needs to be aware of them before coming back in the fall.
Oh, very good, very good. Yes, excellent. Anyway, we're about at the end here before Sarah tells me. And I want to, next week, we're going to have Steve Fishman. He's the chair of the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission. And he'll be talking about what's the possibility of more renewable energy, that sort of thing, and what's going on at the commission these days. And, there's a lot of things happening. So I think it'll be a very interesting roundtable. So I'm very much looking forward to it. So please join. So thank you very much, everybody. It was a good session. And Jane and I will be working on the getting Laura live.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Social Justice Committee has committed to being willing to pay an honorarium. So
Yeah.
we are hoping that that will leverage her participation.
Great.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Be well, everyone.